All right, great. Well, I am really thrilled that we are having Women Who Stay, Women Who Care for Creation, and I'm equally thrilled that Molly Burhans has agreed to kick us off. Molly is an American cartographer, a data scientist, and an environmental activist. She is the founder of Good Lands, an organization which is mobilizing the Catholic Church to use its land for environmental and social justice purposes. Molly was the chief cartographer for the first unified digital global map of the Catholic Church in history, which was premiered in the Vatican in 2016. There she was known as the Map Lady. She was awarded Young Champion of the Earth by the United Nations in 2019. She was also a National Geographic Emerging Explorer in the class of 2021. And the same year, the Sierra Club honored Molly with their Earth Care Award. She is one of Encyclopedia Britannica's 2022 20 Under 40 Young Shapers of the Future in the category of Academia and Ideas. I first learned about Molly's work in an amazing article in the New Yorker, and I have been fangirling her ever since and harassing her nicely to join the Women Who Stay, and I'm glad that she was available this time. So I'm going to turn it over to her. On behalf of Holy Trinity, welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thank you everyone for joining this evening. I am really excited to speak with you all. Obviously, passionate about women in the church and looking forward to what's next, especially given my kind of history with, I guess, it's officially on the record in this this month's issue of Woman Church World from the Holy See that in 2018, Pope Francis solicited me to establish a cartography institute in the Vatican. And that was, I believe, the first time that we at least know of that a woman was ever solicited by a pope to do such a thing. It is under negotiation because it also had it's a big step forward. The other reason why I'm personally so excited to be with this community is that my mom was actually baptized when she was a baby at Holy Trinity Church. So I have some family ties here that make it really special. So how we're going to start off this talk, we're going to end by around 6:30, but I'm going to go through some slides that just explain what I actually do. Even though my MO is making land work for good, there's a lot behind that. I'll explain how I got the name Map Lady and hopefully try to justify it enough for you. You can decide if that's a worthy title when I'm done. And after that, I would just going to touch on some of the woman stuff in the church that I've experienced, what it's like being in this position for me. And I'm really interested then to open up the dialogue between all of us on the commonalities here that we share, the stories we share, and ideas. So we're going to start with that talk and then kind of go into an open Q&A. And as Ashley said, questions, just ask them in the comment section. So. Try to just hide this little. Okay, so this is a polygon. It represents something very close to you if you're in the DC area. It's the Potomac River watershed with all of its unique hydrology, landforms, geology, species habitats, human development patterns, ecosystems. This is a line. It delineates the boundary between Turkey and Syria. And if there are any bird nerds in the audience, you might know what these are. These are the migratory flyways of the world. A map is one of the most powerful tools that we have for understanding how the world exists and the conditions, and also for creating blueprints to imagine and realize new futures. In 2016, I led a team at ESRI, a GIS company, to make a map that saw the world in an entirely new way that had never been done before, along geo-religious boundaries. So when I say geo-religious, we've mapped, say, geopolitical boundaries are a good example, countries, and in a place like the United States, you go countries, states, counties, etc. And it was the first time that ecclesiastical jurisdictions, so that's like even bishops' conferences, had a digital database map made. And I had spent years before that searching, really expecting that somebody else must have done this. And I'll explain later why this is really important for Laudato Si, but also for all of the Catholic missions on a global scale. Just for some terminology, when I say ecclesiastical jurisdiction, it is a big kind of mouthful of words there. An Episcopal conference is what I call Bishop's conference is an example. That's what's an admin 1 boundary within the Catholic Church. So in geopolitical boundaries, we speak of admin 1 as country boundaries. We speak of admin 2 as subnational boundaries. Admin 3 as sub-subnational boundaries, so like counties in the United States. And below that, you have admin 4, which can be anything from zip codes to census tracts. They're much smaller. And admin 0 would be continents. So these are the admin 1 boundaries of the church, and there wasn't even a complete map of these when I began. And for example, we are in the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. They don't always conform to geopolitical boundaries. So you can see the North African Bishops Conference spans multiple countries. So the level below that is admin 2. Those are provinces. And this layer, you can see there's kind of holes in it, holy see in such a way. Because the provinces of the Catholic Church don't contiguously cover the surface of the earth, because there's a canonical requirement that they have at least 1 archdiocese and 1 diocese. So a lot of these places where there are holes in the map at this level are simply because those are mission territories and don't meet the requirement of a province. You can see, such as in the United States, where I've been living for the last couple of years, was in the Hartford Archdiocese province, so it's called the Hartford province. Even though I wasn't always living there, I was in the Bridgeport diocese sometimes too. So admin 3, the level below provinces, which is below Episcopal conferences, is dioceses. There are over 3,300 dioceses globally. And they contiguously cover the entire surface of the earth. And this had never been mapped in a globally coherent way. The last update that we found was Atlas Hierarchicus, which was hand-drawn and in multiple different projections. So if you can imagine all those different maps where you see sometimes Greenland looks way too big and sometimes it's really weird and smushed up. When you have a lot of different projections and no standardization, when you're drawing maps on different pages, it makes that information pretty much useless and a really nice doodle. So there effectively wasn't any global map of the Catholic Church, and there definitely wasn't any digital one. Now, for dioceses, there are a lot of different types of dioceses. This map that I'm sharing with you was last updated in 2019, so there have been a couple shifts, but the blue on here represents archdiocese. The pinkish red represents just regular dioceses. And these other things like the green and the purple are mission surius, apostolic vicariate, these different kind of levels of mission territories often. So I just want to be clear, when I talk about diocese, I'm talking about all these things when I'm referencing kind of this global admin 3 scale. So why does that matter? Well, maps are really important for understanding land. And why does land matter? Well, if you look throughout history, I don't think that the history of human civilization has probably been impacted by anything else more so than the cosmologies we adopt and believe, our religion, and also the land that we're on, the resources it has, and how we relate to that. It's both propelled human civilization forward, these two factors together, in ways that are integral and vital. At the same time, these two factors are easily arguable the things that people have fought the most wars about. So going into understanding the land of anything, especially religion, takes care and respect towards the security concerns that might arise. Sounds like a lot to deal with, so why don't we just let it go and not even think about our land? Well, it's really the scope of the crisis that we're facing means that we have to. So on the planet Earth, about 24.6 million square miles of it is inhabitable. The rest is either desert or mountain. Speaking for land, not water here. And about 8% of habitable land on Earth is owned by faith-based organizations. And 5% of all commercial forests are owned by faith-based organizations, as estimated by the United Nations. That is a lot of land. That's about the same size as India and Sudan combined. Now, just to clarify, that is all faith-based organizations, their estimations. So that's not just the Catholic Church, but the Catholic Church owns a nice chunk that's back of the paper kind of calculation. There's a lot of this number that gets thrown around from with my work that is very wrong. So I want to clarify that nobody knows, but if we do know the stats about parishes and have some ideas about how big they are. It's at least the size of France, but globally, all faith-based institutions larger than India and Sudan combined. It's huge. And specifically for the Catholic Church, since we don't have a very clear idea about the actual land acreage, there's some things we do know, which is there are about 1.2 billion Catholics in the world today. That's about 16% of the global population. Catholic healthcare is the largest non-governmental, or actually even governmental. The Catholic healthcare is the largest provider of healthcare systems in the entire world, serving 26% of healthcare facilities. Catholic education is the largest non-governmental provider of education in the world, serving over 54 million students in secondary and primary schools alone. And it continues to grow. And there's also universities, as you are probably familiar with the one in your backyard there, Georgetown, and many more. Catholic education is a massive, robust network in addition to healthcare. Further, we comprise the second largest humanitarian aid network in the world. It's only second unless you counted the United Nations with all of its member organizations, many of which are Catholic. So, given the scope and size, not just of our ministries, but of our presence, realize we must own a lot of land. This is our Catholic properties within the United States that we have mapped. We don't just own a lot of land. We actually are, it's fairly safe to say, collectively under the umbrella of our institutions, which corporately are many different. But under that umbrella, we are without doubt the largest non-governmental network of land holdings in the world that have a specific governance structure that ties them together and a specific belief that ties together the institutions and organizations that own this land. So when I was, in my late teens, I naively thought, gosh, largest network of healthcare, largest network of education, they must have the largest network of conservation. I'm so excited. I know what my vocation is to be. I'm going to go off and I'm going to be a park ranger nun at one of these Catholic parks. Well, boy, was I in for a surprise when I found out that Catholic conservation was not really a thing that existed. There were a couple organizations out there, like the St. Catherine Conservation Group, Sineza, in Africa, that had, even before Let Out to Sea, begun heeding the call to care for creation, including land. But it was a very scrappy, very early start, and there weren't land trusts developed yet. There weren't lands that were actually put into use. It was more of a call to action that was occurring in that time. So I went looking for who was doing this, because I still didn't believe that there's no way this wasn't being addressed, the land situation. And I founded Good Lands to really focus on understanding the land that we own. So not just Good Lands can help people see the potential of it within the Catholic Church, but also so everyone, all these organizations and beyond can figure out what is there and how to really realize our call to care for our common home and each other with the land we own. A good example of what I mean when I talk about land for good is, the ecological approach. It really is integrated. It's about relationships. It's not just about trees or biodiversity, even though that's a piece of it. It's about this holistic view, because in the environment, so many things are context specific. So this is an example of an ecological parish plan that we did. And what you start off with is this base understanding of what's there. And you grow to make a design based on the community's interests and needs and how to really make the site have both scientifically informed ecological integrity to support their social and spiritual ministries as well. So we have economic components of this plan which include things like strategic tree planting, which can save up to 30% on your heat and gas bills over time if you plant a tree in the right place. It includes opportunities for, say, community use to rent spaces. It includes solar panels and renewable energy. It includes allotments for food development, especially if you're in a food desert. This is a great thing to consider. It includes a trail loop. So that's more of community, less of economic. The communal trail loop passing through it. It includes a no-mow meadow in the back, that yellow area, which reduces costs because you don't have to mow that area or do any maintenance. And it also increases wildlife habitat. Includes greenhouses. So this is really an extreme example of a site that's been like designed down to the T, but even just one of these programs in the right place can really enhance a community site for multiple goals. And like I said, with ecology, it's not just about, habitat, it's about so much more. And each thing you do in that space is going to multiply the impacts of other programs. When we look at the environment, I think it gets really overwhelming for people sometimes because it's like, well, what are you doing? And then people like me often start to go on these almost like spirals where we get really excited and we're like, oh, but it's also health and it's also this and it's also like economic and it's that. And then people go, what? But the reality is the environment, you have to think of it as the matrix where all of our other ministries happen and also where it enables them. If you want to feed the poor and the hungry, you have to grow that food somewhere. If you want to house the homeless, you have to house them somewhere. And by taking care of our land, we're multiplying homelessness, driving wildfires. When we do it wrong, it gets really wrong and it makes everything else we want to do, whether it's Catholic healthcare or Catholic education, it interferes with that in ways that are a multiplier. But when we do it right, all of our other ministries and missions are going to be enhanced. So kind of zooming out, what we ended up doing was, okay, so there's a lot of land, as you saw. So many properties that it wouldn't make any sense to try to get everyone to go do these plans or even contract, say, a landscape architecture firm or an engineering firm to do an ecologically sound plan because that is totally not cost effective. So we've created actually an entirely new model for supporting Catholic communities, and it is applicable to groups with over 30 properties in a portfolio over 10,000 acres of land. So like an entire diocese property portfolio. And I'll get into why we did that. So we have all these different kind of classes of Catholic land use that we've derived from data mining of Catholic properties across the US, like monasteries, convents, housing shelters. And we've mapped that all onto potential, onto the best kind of solutions that can work for these spaces, whether it's allotments, contemplative gardens, civic spaces, restoration and management sites, provisions for youth, and also for migration, relief, and social entrepreneurship. Is this site really potentially an opportunity for that? And we've further developed this for financial use of Catholic properties. So for leasing, say, a building or leasing actually its exterior real estate. And the reason why we end up going on this triple bottom line perspective is the financial models for environment stuff. And I'll get into that in a moment. But so basically, so to zoom out, you have actually doing stuff on the ground that are transformative to your community. We have a way to actually see an entire diocese property portfolio and help them do that stuff where it matters. So that it's not like the one parish that is in a wealthier neighborhood that is not getting food in people's mouths and clothes on people's back does the one tree planting thing when that tree planting would have had 300 times the impact if it was done in an inner city area that had no trees. So it's really about being smart and knowing your environment as a whole, as a larger community, and contextualizing those programs and putting the action where it makes sense, where you're going to have the most benefit for people and the planet. The environment, to do environmental programs requires understanding your environment. Very simple. So you can see this is, for example, the Los Angeles Archdiocese. So we've classified all these properties, and now we know which ones can benefit a community best by tree planting, which ones have different market values, which ones can support habitat connectivity best, which ones are really good for conservation so that communities can actually use that information to inform their own work and their neighbors. Then we mapped this in the context of the world. So mapping the properties in the Usccb, we have not mapped any Catholic properties outside the United States on that scale. We mapped all the dioceses and ecclesiastical jurisdictions, but I think it would be a terrible idea for anyone to try to make that map. But we are encouraging policy development on the larger kind of global scale so others can make these maps in places where there's risk for that kind of data. So zooming out, you take this algorithm kind of approach to individual properties, and you can then classify dioceses. When I say classify, it allows you to kind of transfer and reapply projects. So if we figured out, these are the top 10 properties within, the Washington, D.C. Archdiocese for stormwater management. These are the top 10, diocesan properties for tree planting. These are the top 10 properties for affordable housing based on over layers of information about, government incentives and beyond. You can take that program that was developed for the Washington Archdiocese, and you can reapply it in a diocese of a similar classification. So we've classified all the dioceses globally into certain prototypes that can be reapplied. So you can see we have these management and design templates. So say it's a diocese with a lot of desert, their focus should be xeriscape. So that's planting with non-super water consuming plants, more arid plants. And that wouldn't really be applying in some other places, but you can now take that model that took a lot of time and resources to make and just easily reapply it in all the dioceses with that similar kind of setup globally. Further, this classification of dioceses that we've made takes into account, does a city, a diocese, or the whole diocese have infrastructure with paved roads? Because if you're doing stormwater management, so that's when you divert water from just going down into drains off, say, a paved road, but you divert it back to sinking back into the ground. That kind of analysis and thinking about that kind of, the solutions related to stormwater makes zero sense if you don't have any paved surfaces in an area. So it's really context dependent, and this allows you to scale environmental work with Catholic communities globally in an organized way that is super efficient resource-wise when reusing these models, which take a lot of time and effort and work with scientists to generate. So you can see, like I said, this is kind of technical, so I'll go through this fast. You have class ontologies, you have dioceses that you've classified, and then you have these planning prototypes, which you can now easily go and send to dioceses as resource and reapply that are based on science. So one of the big issues with this whole approach, even the property records, or as I mentioned, the diocese boundaries, was this was the state of most of the property records, even within the United States. Actually, this is if you had them all in one basement, you were in luck. They are spread throughout dioceses, in assessors' offices, closed off. And thankfully, we did the initial map before the Pennsylvania report. And now, since the Pennsylvania report, they're all broken into little LLCs that you can't even understand the names of because they're intentionally kind of hidden. So we had to go around and really get this information on the baseline level. I began this work thinking I would go in and work with the diocese, and they'd hand over a nice clean database of their property records, and then we could just start layering all these, this information, like how they relate to habitat connectivity, how they relate to wetlands, how they relate to, urban food deserts. And like I said, it was not a nice database. It wasn't even a single file cabinet. So this ended up kind of reframing not only Goodland's approach, but Goodland's work initially. And I would say the last 6 years have largely been digital transformation efforts, just to even get that baseline information that you need to do any sort of scientifically informed environmental analyses on properties. So this is an example of the Boston Archdiocese with its properties mapped. And within there, we've done models like sea level rise to help them think about properties. As they're closing all these parishes, are you going to keep a parish open where it's going to be underwater within the next 20 years? These things usually aren't considered even in pastoral planning. So, how maps and the environment connect, and this is like the map lady thing, is really down to making informed decisions. Um, you cannot plan or manage land, period. If it's a single site or if it's an entire property portfolio or a region, you just can't do it without maps. Maps are really the language that environmental planners have used for ages. Even John Muir, one of the founders of the United States National Park System, he was a map maker. Maps and environmentalism have been tied together since environmentalism and ecology as a science became a science from kind of a more poetic naturalism. Alexander Humboldt, who is the founder of biogeography, he was back in the 1800s, I believe. And he was a map maker too. He'd just go and he would observe and he would make maps. And so when you understand what's there, that allows you to make changes that are informed and grounded in reality. That allows you to not waste thousands of dollars planting a bunch of wetland trees in a very dry soil. And you'd be shocked by how common it is that people do not think or incorporate their environment and understanding it with environmental programs. So you can't really plan land without maps. So we do planning, map making. So this is a map that we made of habitat connectivity in about 200 different variables for the properties in the Usccb. So showing how they contribute to these really critical corridors for critters as they migrate. It also shows how they relate to wetlands and really critical kind of areas with endangered species. This map is not public. We do not make, there's a lot of diocesan scale maps public, but all the property scale maps that we have are secured. But you can see video demos. So maps provide really valuable data, though, beyond the goals of Laudato Si, which is something that we've run into a lot. So Goodlands, we didn't really get any funding from the start. We have thankfully had bits and pieces here. I would say about 300,000 to 400,000 over the space of 7 years. And so we started doing projects for income. And a lot of the projects, after we started just even cultivating interest in maps in the church, pro bono work, it was grueling. If you read the New Yorker profile, I was eating beans and crying. I'm still kind of eating beans and crying, but it gets better. You got to have a long vision for this stuff. It's big systems change. So we just started taking contracts just to even get the map data that we needed for the environmental stuff and getting people excited. So we worked with Catholic Foundation for Education Mapping, doing suitability analyses with Catholic school placement and funding. We've worked with other groups that have mapped in relation to real estate in their diocese, I should say diocesan groups. We wouldn't do that kind of mapping with someone unless it was their property. So we just started kind of getting interest in doing this. And then I've worked with students at Yale School of the Environment and University of Pennsylvania and a couple other universities over the years. And so we would do these environmental Laudato Si analyses completely pro bono because no one was willing to pay for them and no one was interested. And it was not until this last year that we had the first time a diocese actually reached out to us and requested environmental work as like not something we would just have to put in for free and hope that someone would use that information. So I don't know if you can follow this thread. So we want to do environmental stuff, but you need the map data. So we have to make maps. But then that map data is really valuable for a lot. So you can kind of start the systems change work going where, the barriers are going to come down a bit. Maps also, if we did a full focused project just on the environment, that would be such a waste of data for a diocese or provinces, ministries beyond the environment. That data is really useful for pastoral planning. It's really useful for their real estate teams. It's really useful for their communications teams, for their fundraising teams. And we don't want to waste that data. So when we do work with a group, we don't just, make this nice plan. We actually stand all that data up in a cloud-based platform for them so they can continue to leverage that information beyond the goals that we focused on while making that data, but for all of their other programs. So that's kind of how the digital transformation and the environmental, regeneration go hand in hand, because these maps, as I said, are useful for a lot. And this is kind of like how we stand things up. So you could have a system of records inside with the diocese, and then you can have even outside engagement with the diocesan living atlas, with dashboards, semi-open data, say of Catholic schools. If you want to, do some analysis for a diocese and it's not a bunch of sensitive data, you could have it be a school project. You can have people really engage with the space where they worship in totally different ways with maps. Not only just inform your programs, but bring people in. And on a global scale, thinking about this, if you map, once again, for say a big conservation project in somewhere like, Northeast Africa, just as an example, where there's a lot more kind of aid and there's, refugee pathways in some of those areas, that data that you make for environmental work is really important for other international Catholic NGOs and efforts of religious orders, whether it's delivering healthcare and building healthcare infrastructure, or refugee services like JRS. So a lot of this is about realizing that we need this information to realize Laudato Si scientifically, but we also will enhance everything that we do as Catholics with that information. I'm gonna speed through this because it's very kind of technical, and I really just want to chat with you all. So I'm gonna go through this fast. If you want to see more of this, I can send you some of these slides. I'm just gonna use this to explain how on earth I went from a parish ecological plan or a diocese plan to the Vatican map lady. It's because global analyses that we use, that classification system, going way back to earlier when I was talking, the classification system for dioceses direct what we do there. And all this stuff kind of comes together. And the reason why a Vatican Cartography Institute makes sense is that that would take the intelligence of the Holy See, like Secretary of State, and first they would be able to manage ecclesiastical jurisdiction boundaries. I'm right now like the one-woman NGA for the Catholic Church, and it's completely unacceptable. I shouldn't be managing and updating when diocese boundaries change. This should be something done in the Holy See, and there should be canon lawyers informing this process. So I'm kind of stuck with these global data sets, negotiating how to just get them into Rome and get the system in place to use them. The Holy See needs to be able to put out, geographic standards and governance, so that, say, someone in Syria wants to do a Laudato Si plan, that they don't make all of that data public, because you can get people targeted and killed with geodata about property and people in some parts of the world. So the Vatican really needs this center to implement the standards and the policy, so that Goodlands doesn't do everything we never could, so that, any group who uses geodata, whether it's a diocese or a Catholic NGO, does it in a way that is respectful and responsible and informed, and also so that environmental work that is informed by spatial science can scale globally in a manner that is very, like I said, responsible. So kind of skipping through this, the global data helps you determine where you're going to reapply kind of that high-level analysis of properties around the world by classifying things into this regional scale. And then to get down to the property scale, you do analyses on the regional scale, which give you this classification system of this kind of typology of properties. And that then feeds directly into what you can do in a place and where it makes sense within a community where your funding goes, such as, this is an example of a farm that I designed that's being built in Springfield for at-risk youth. There's a rain garden, there's a greenhouse. It's doing a lot, and it's building so much more than just ecology. It's building community health opportunities, education, and really transforming so much. The data, when you do a site scale plan too, you have to use a lot of information to make something that's consistent and coherent, and you have to know what plants you're planting. And that kind of information can all really feed back into this system across scales to really increase not just the integrity ecologically of projects, but also the communications across scales within the church. I'm going to stop there and just open up the conversation. As a woman, I would love to like hear your thoughts. I think I would say, you know, what I've experienced has been kind of completely unprecedented, with being the first kind of woman given permission by a pope to start an institute, even if, you know, I'm renegotiating. God knows where that it happened, how that goes. I really hope it happens. It's been really hard. I spend a lot of time just repeating myself a lot. Sometimes I feel like I just, you know, I would have made more working as a McDonald's employee for many of these years while I've been representing the church on a global stage. And that's really, really disheartening. But I don't know if that's a woman thing. The whole Catholic ecology space is severely lacking in funding. And that's a big issue. So it's not just me. There's a lot of guys in this space too. The few of us, I should say, that have stuck it out, that don't have the robust support we need. So I don't think that's a specific woman thing. As a woman, I think there's I've been really naive, and it's been really helpful because I had no idea what I was up against when I went into this. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Molly. I'm still a big fan, still fanning. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'll start with those. And I think it won't surprise you, you know, Fred, and you can add on. What's kind of the budget you need to do something like this on a diocesan level?
So on a diocesan scale, through partnerships, we've gotten it down a lot. Like a full, I would say, master plan with a focus in implementing the data platform and doing the digital transformation is about $400,000 to $500,000, and it takes about 9 months. I'm looking more at like partners in health models, and community-driven models to try to see how we can even further cut that. I mean, it used to be 1.6 million per diocese. Nobody did that. So, but that was just the cost, you know, for what it is, without even overhead factored in. So like 500,000, and I'm kind of taking a pause right now, really looking at that model for how we can get Catholic colleges locally, Catholic, you know, tech knowledge locally, to be able to lower the cost. But at the end of the day, the ROI for these projects actually makes sense. So
I actually
Molly,
think that's, sorry, go ahead, Fred.
just a follow on, that was my question. One of the goals that I have is to try to fund or enable target-rich geographies in the Catholic domain, specifically for the purpose of reforestation. Okay, because I'm involved in organizations that do that. Is there a way that you would do an audit or ecological assessment that is more narrow in terms of its use, or a more targeted, target-rich geography, or Catholic organization like a particular province, let's say Ivory Coast for the Jesuits or something like that?
that's a great question. Like most things in ecology, the answer to it is it depends. So like forestry, like a forest inventory, specifically, yes. Like I've been very hesitant. I've been approached actually numerous times about doing a targeted solar capacity analysis in dioceses, or targeted communications, putting 5G towers on certain properties, and dioceses can actually get massive revenue from that if it's done right. And I've been really hesitant about, we haven't taken any of those, partially because of capacity. I kind of like reached my limit with my last project, and I was like, okay, God, I need to sleep, and we need to figure out how to build capacity before I do another one. But for like that stuff, the biggest amount of work and like most time consuming is just getting the foundational data in order. And then you can just pile these analyses in. So it almost really doesn't make sense, because a project like that is going to be almost as expensive as a master planning process. But to preface that too, though, having a targeted initiative while you're implementing any new technology in any organization, whether it's a diocese or a religious order or a government, like anything, you need to have something that's focused that people can get around, and then you can go big, because the potentials are infinite for how you can use the kind of data, but it's also really overwhelming. So something like a forestry or a solar plant, I think it's too specific. And also most dioceses and religious provinces I've talked with, like, for better or worse, the ecology is the second thought. So if you can help them like focus on something like, affordable housing and forests, then you're going to get like more interest. If you start with something that people aren't, that you have these champions for ecology, but it's just them in a diocese they're interested, it's not going to go very far. I don't know if that answered it correctly. Like, yes, you need to focus and you need to have a specific thing. Usually the ecology things aren't a good place to start, sadly. But if you can like squeeze it in with something else, or you could do a whole ecological plan tied in as like a focus with forestry and with stormwater or with sustainable agriculture, soil restoration, that is more, I think, relevant, and the return for whoever is doing that is going to be actually much more tangible than like one analysis.
So Amelia has a few questions. I'm gonna let her ask one, but the one that I kind of had too was, and you mentioned, you kind of touched on it a little bit. What are the barriers? Is it financial? Is it kind of climate deniers? Is it that this is just not a priority? I'm just curious what the roadblocks are that you've encountered.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the roadblocks have changed over time. There's been some consistent ones, one of them being financial. The first roadblock I faced was that nobody really cared about maps. I actually remember when I launched Goodland social media, it was while the Pope was in town, in the United States, and I walked through Times Square and I had handed out flyers saying sustainable land use for the Catholic Church, and like I made myself hand out 2,000 flyers, and really have a lot more empathy and admiration for anyone who hands out flyers in Times Squares as part of their job. It's not fun. And I got like 2 likes on social media, and one of them was my mom. So there was a lot more education than I realized, not just in the ecology space, but in the map space. A big barrier to getting over that was I led one of the premier GIS teams in the world who had just finished the admin, 3 boundaries for the United Nations and CDC in West Africa, to be able to make the maps, you could say the data containers to actually see where Ebola was going. And now we've used those for COVID. You can see counties, you can see subregions globally. Like, that didn't even exist in that region. So like with that team, we also did that Usccb map on the property scale. And so that helped us leap over the barrier in dioceses and conversations with bishops, where they're like, oh no, you can't know what we have. And I'm like, okay, we already know what you have. Let's go to the next part of the conversation, because anyone can know that, not just us, and they need to know what they have, but also predatory real estate agents. And that happens a lot in the church, So I think getting over that fear of transparency, we did that. The other barrier beyond that is that ecological, and like I said, we had our first request for environmental work. The biggest barrier right now as a whole, not just for Goodlands, but in the Catholic ecology and conservation space, is without a doubt funding. So almost all of Goodlands funding has been secular. I have been living, eating beans and crying, and like I just had to move home. I got to be teaching. Like, I can't, we don't even have a website up. Actually, we had a really good website. It's not up because I am the webmaster. I developed our website. I deployed it. I manage over 500 public data sets in a web portal, and I was just actually on a retreat with a bunch of other Catholic eco people. Like, the St. Catherine Center runs over 400 habitats globally, and they are all volunteers. They have less than a four-figure budget. 300 habitats. That's less than $10,000. People like Alan is the guy that runs the entire Catholic Youth Network for environmental sustainability in Africa. He can barely afford to survive in Nairobi. I mean, it's really uncool. And I think one of the challenges is, in this space, is that, like, I know with my work, to actually get to that next level, we've done the proof of concept projects. The next level requires capital on the order of $1.6 to $2 million so that we can take on a larger load of projects, and so that we can also have a back-end staff that is like there and not just like, 1099 contractors, and like, so there's some permanence, and there's no Catholic funding we found. There's like Sisters of Notre Dame have these smaller grants for these site scale stuff, but to really make the infrastructure for Catholic environmental movement to become now the next Catholic healthcare, the next charism of the century, is going to require millions of dollars, and no one has stepped up to the plate yet, period.
So Clara asked this question: has any other large church or religious institution done something similar to this project? If so, is there cross-pollination for ideas, methods, partnerships, funding?
Well, definitely for, so I love the James Joyce quote, "Here comes Catholic, here comes everyone." I think if we solve this, just like what happened with Catholic healthcare, this could be a model that everyone's going to follow. The World Evangelical Alliance, which unites and serves over 600 million evangelicals, has approached me. They want to franchise our work and they want to replicate it. But because it's just me, I don't have the capacity to help them do that. But once I do, absolutely. I've worked with the Agrarian Trust and with the Episcopalians, and they've actually started to do a lot of knowledge sharing with them. And they've started to take what we've kind of that model and are trying to scale it. Once again, they have their own sets of barriers, but they have been, the ecology barrier of people seeing the importance of that has been less for them. Who are other religions? The Mormons have crazy back-end map system. I've met with their CIO. They do have a map with every single, that I've seen, with every single current former Mormon and where they live and if they're apostate or heretic or in good standing. And so part of my stuff in Rome is to like advocate for that never happening in the Catholic Church and data privacy policy and canon law, but they are, I guess you could say, they're far ahead of that. I don't know if they're using maps for ecology. They definitely have a big thing with agriculture in that religion. I've seen, I've talked and met with a lot of priests and women religious in fragile states, and just having their land records available to them in a digital form will actually allow them to keep that land. If there's, like in Vietnam, there's a lot of non-state actors grabbing lands, and the government turns a blind eye to this. And by the church having its records, they can bring that to an international court of law and prevent land grabs. So, I mean, like I said, there's a whole multiplication of value just from the planning, the map data, and the system to enable its multiplication of use. Yeah, so evangelicals. I've talked with, actually, there was a coalition of Buddhist monasteries that reached out to me. Once again, capacity issue. I can't serve all these people. Where I and Good Lines are at right now, but like it was so cool to talk with them and hear their philosophy, which echoed so much of Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, JP2 and beyond's integral ecology. There's definitely space there. There's some smaller groups, I would say, that really are way far ahead on this stuff. Some of the Anglicans, they just did a GIS inventory, I think, of their land in England, at least. So like it's bits and pieces, and because it is the systems change that requires the digital transformation alongside the ecological conversion, it's like you can see bits coming out.
Amelia, did you want to ask one of your other questions about?
There are so many questions in the list. I want everyone, to somehow get a chance. So, Ashley, you go ahead and continue curating. And Molly, it's in the chat, but I'll just very briefly echo that this is one of the most unbelievably remarkable and impressive experiences I've ever had. And, you eating beans and crying is, whether that makes you, if I feel sort of a solidarity as a millennial, sort of in some of the things I'm trying to do, I think you are at the beginning of something that is changing the world, and I'm just so blown away by you. So I don't want to take up any more time. I don't let all the questions come together.
Well, I think that one thing that Amelia mentioned and someone else privately questioned me was just about your experience at the Vatican and being a woman there. Maybe you can kind of elaborate a little about being that select few that's been invited.
The chosen ones.
The map lady.
I don't know. Maybe it's the anti-chosen ones. It's a lot to deal with. you know, I kind of had a half conversion. Like I went through with the whole First Communion thing when I was a kid, but didn't go much after. And I got confirmed in college. It was a really arduous process because I've never been disillusioned about the bad stuff happening in the Catholic Church. And boy, in property, there is even more. Might be some of the reason why none of us have funding. But there's like, I studied ancient Greek for 2 years, like went through the whole Nicene Creed, like went through the Gospel of Mark from the Codex Sinaiticus, like really, I would say I argued. And I had a great spiritual director who was a Jesuit and really had the heart of Christ present. And then I had a really hard-headed spiritual or friend who was a Jesuit who allowed me to really like argue Catholic dogma without feeling like it was being wishy-washy. So I lost my argument with the Jesuits. It was the best argument I ever lost. And now I'm back, you know, trying to renegotiate this contract with the Pope. So I guess you could say that's 2.0. But it was like, it was really, really, like Catholicism is so like intellectually coherent. It's so liberating. It's so, you know, it's so awesome and sacramentally just like exquisite. And it feels like a cosmic sigh of relief to me to be a Catholic. It feels right. I'm so grateful. And it's so funny because people say you lose your faith when you go to Rome. And I gained it because all I see is like, okay, first, there's no way this has been operating for 2,000 years successfully without divine intervention. But also like the corruption that you see or the destruction of the earth, even for more broadly, like you have to realize that if you aren't forgiving of your brothers and sisters, you aren't a Christian. And it challenges me in a different way than like if I was a Quaker, that would be a lot easier, I think. Some days I've never met a really like rude or terrible Quaker. But in the Vatican as a woman, I had no idea what I was doing was like so out there. Like it was really, really naive when I look back, like calling the Vatican switchboard, getting a meeting with the Secretary of State, getting the map approved. So like I cleared it with them before I made the diocese maps and stuff. You know, meeting with Cardinal Turkson. At that time, I was living in stayed in a youth hostel for 15 euros a night because I couldn't afford a monastery. Now that's ironic given my work. And it just felt like open. I haven't really felt me has been naturally inclined to just I think it's a toxic theology that's not correct. So I'm trying to correct that where your charity doesn't meet reality. That can sometimes be hard. So I think part of me put on blinders to the misogyny I faced. So it's hard to say that. I'm shocked by the reception I've gotten, to be honest. I think man or woman getting to that point with a Pope, even getting to speak with him is just, it's beyond what any norm. Like I said, there's a lot of repeating. There's a lot of, sometimes I know I've been called difficult. Like cardinals, I say it's obedience, but obedient, but obnoxious. But yeah, so I guess I don't think they would call a man difficult. I don't think, you know, and then there's been, you know, interactions where I'm like, wow, this person like hasn't even spent a second with like actually digesting the intelligence of the idea. And I've also seen in the broader, I would say, Catholic ecology space, I see things where people are like, wow, it'd be really good to have maps, if only. And I'm like, guys, yeah, and the policy side is where I see it the most, not in the Vatican, I think, though, but outside of the Vatican, when I'm working with Catholic organizations that want to use geodata, and I start like really hammering home that like if you map Catholic properties in the wrong place and make that public, people can get really hurt and assets can be really compromised, and like I get treated like I'm some neurotic, clueless chick, which is just really ridiculous.
We like difficult women at Holy Trinity, so you're always welcome here. Does anyone, we only have a few more minutes. I don't know if anyone else has a question. I will tell you, Molly, a lot of hold on one second, Alejandra. Yeah, that there are a lot of people interested in learning more or reaching out to you. So I'll I'll send you a copy of the chat so that you can kind of filter through that and put people in touch, knowing your limited capacity. But I also have a graduating senior in high school who would love to work for free for you. So go ahead, Alejandra.
Yes, it's more like in your presentation, you develop the maps of the land, Catholic land, correct? And then you develop the algorithm for determining the optimal use of that land, right? But you haven't been able to apply that algorithm at the diocese or any level, except in some few occasions because it's very expensive. That's the problem, right? And to apply that in any parish or diocesan level is 500,000 more or less. That's what it is now. So that's clear. The second question is then, if you have the algorithm, it's not for the parish of the church or the diocese to say, okay, I want to use this land for a forest or for cemetery or for this and that, because the algorithm is already developed. It has to be, it comes from your side, because the ultimate use has to do with so many variables that had to do with the type of land, the needs of the community, etc. Okay, so it's not like the demand side, it's like the supply side kind of thing, right? So that I understand now why you are not getting the money, because it's just like that. So I would suggest that you have to develop a plan for this, because there are a lot of externalities on this. Because first of all, it's not what the parish want, it's what the algorithm determines to do for that land.
Well,
right?
that's not correct completely, because the framework we use is called geodesign. And it starts with the people of the place and it ends with the people of the place. So a big thing about maps is they break down silos, they allow people to sit together and look at the information. So it's not like you press a button and out comes, here are the things to plant trees on, here is this, like it's not directing you. It first starts with sitting with the people. So a good example would be like Sisters of St. Joseph. We didn't do a project with them, but they really changed how we approach things, because a provincial superior in one area was ready to sell a 40,000 acre property while the sisters on the ground were ready to conserve it. And that showed not that the sisters on the ground were totally ignorant about the books and the reality of, say, 80 sisters going into retirement and needing that money. And it also showed that, the provincial superior wasn't like this witch who didn't care about the environment. It was an information problem. So the algorithms they're a tool, but they aren't an end. They're just a little piece of the mean. And ultimately, sustainability is about people. If people don't connect with the project, if they don't connect with the results, it's never going to happen. So you're completely right about that. So how we work with that is like these workshops, and then you use these algorithms to show, and then you can get a parish, well, not a parish, but a diocesan, say, planning committee with their finances, sitting at the table with the bishop, sitting with the care for creation team, sitting with the real estate team, and they can look at the information and they use that. They're the ultimate end arbitrators of this. It is not the algorithm making decisions for us. It's making the science approachable and accessible and helping the information be part of the conversation, rather than just kind of, as it is now, I've seen sometimes where it's just this haphazard, not very informed process.
But
it's a really good point. Yes.
Since the benefits go beyond the parish, then comes the externality. So that's why I don't understand why the Vatican, doesn't have money for this, because this is the case of like the federal government. There are some things that are public goods that have externality that have to be financed by the higher institution, because there is no incentive, or there is an incentive, but not the big incentive to put that money, because the benefit will be spread across other parishes, other, So I don't understand why there is no money. I mean, there must be some money that can be allocated. That's the part that probably you need, like some, the parishes in the United States, they advocate for you. Once it's more like, giving the information and all what can be done parish by parish or some important parishes, and then pushing the Vatican onto this, because it just doesn't make sense that you are just getting every penny yourself,
I think she'll agree with you, Alejandra. Right, Molly? So Molly, let us know who we can call for you to advocate for sure. So I want to be respectful of Molly's time and all of you. This is everything I thought it would be, Molly. So thank you so much. There are a lot more comments and suggestions for you in the chat, and I will make that available. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We'll continue next Monday with Brenda Davis from the Ignatian Solidarity Network. I hope that you will join us. And I'll reach out to Molly and find out if those of you who are asking for a connection, the best way to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashley. I just want to reiterate, this has been awesome. I'm really grateful. And it's definitely, like I said, it's not just me, it's this whole Catholic ecology space. And I'm in it with these other organizations. All of our stuff fits together really, really well. So it's not just, this is so cool. I just want to be a park ranger nun, but we have to make this entire system. It's a really roundabout way for vocations. So thank you for listening. And
hopefully you'll get to the park ranger part eventually. But I don't know if you'll still be eating beans maybe then too. But so we'll need to support you in the in-between time. So. All right, great, everybody. Thanks so much. And we'll see you next Monday. And we'll make the recording available hopefully by tomorrow. So.
Thank you so much. Take care.